Welcome to an epic motorcycle restoration. Today, we are rescuing a 1977 Jawa Moped that looks like it's been sitting in a muddy field for decades. The entire bike is absolutely caked in thick dirt, and the original red and blue paint is hiding under heavy layers of rust. It is a complete mess. To even see what we are working with, I hook up a high-powered pressure washer and begin blasting away the hardened mud. Watching the high-pressure water strip the thick grime off the seat, the rusted wheels, and the engine block is incredibly satisfying. I meticulously power wash the front headlight nacelle and the rear suspension. It takes a massive amount of water, but we finally reveal the true condition of this classic vintage machine. With the thick mud finally washed away, the intense tear-down process begins. I start at the rear, removing the rusted chain guard and taking off the heavily oxidized rear wheel assembly. The bolts are completely seized, so I apply a generous amount of penetrating oil to break the rust bonds. Moving to the front, I dismantle the rusted drum brake hub and extract the front wheel. Next, I unbolt the front suspension forks and remove the rear shock absorbers from the chassis. Every single piece of this motorcycle must be completely separated. I carefully remove the rubber floorboards, unbolt the main fuel tank, and detach the side covers. The bike is slowly being stripped down to its bare skeletal metal frame, preparing us for the massive restoration ahead. The teardown continues as I disconnect the final engine mounts and carefully lift the heavy, dirt-covered two-stroke engine block out of the frame. We will rebuild that later. Next, I dismantle the rusted headlight housing, the front steering column, and strip the handlebars of their vintage cables and levers, with the entire motorcycle completely disassembled. I lay every single part out on the floor to assess the massive project. Now, the real restoration work begins. I grab the severely rusted and dented rear fender. Using a heavy-duty chemical solvent and a stiff brush, I scrub away the surface grime. Then, I take an angle grinder equipped with a wire wheel and aggressively strip the stubborn red paint and deep rust down to bare, shiny steel. Next, we tackle the heavily clogged chrome exhaust pipe. Decades of unburnt two-stroke oil and carbon have solidified inside the muffler. To clean it, I use a high-temperature blowtorch, igniting the internal carbon deposits. I tap the pipe with a hammer, pour in a specialized chemical solvent, and burn it again. Thick, black smoke pours out as the stubborn sludge is finally incinerated and cleared from the baffle. It is a crazy but highly effective method. Moving on, I disassemble the heavily rusted rear shock absorbers, clamping them into a bench vise. I carefully unscrew the top mounts and extract the thick, oxidized suspension springs. The internal hydraulic fluid is completely degraded. I place all the rusted shock components into a chemical bath to begin the deep cleaning process. Before sandblasting the mainframe, I carefully drill out the rivets, holding the original 1977 manufacturer identification tag. I soak the dirty metal tag in a chemical cleaner, bringing back its original shine to preserve the bike's history. Now, it is time for heavy rust removal. I place the shock absorber sleeves and the front fork tubes into the sandblasting cabinet. The high-pressure abrasive media effortlessly strips away the stubborn rust and old paint, leaving a perfectly clean matte metal surface. Next, I inspect the bare metal frame and discover several critical stress fractures. I fire up the welding machine and carefully lay down thick, penetrating welds to repair the cracked steel tubes, restoring the structural integrity of the chassis so it can safely handle the road again. main body fairing has a massive section completely rusted through. To fix this, I trace the damaged area onto a fresh sheet of heavy gauge steel and cut out a precise repair patch. I clamp the new metal plate into the gap and use my welder to seamlessly fuse the patch into the original bodywork. Using an angle grinder, I smooth down the thick weld beads until the metal surface is perfectly flush. Moving back to the red fender, I use a hammer and dolly to beat out the deep dents to achieve a flawlessly smooth surface before painting. I mix up a batch of automotive body filler. I spread the Bondo evenly over the imperfections, let it cure, and then hand sand the curves until they are completely perfect. The bodywork perfection continues. I apply the automotive filler to the welded patch on the main body fairing, carefully sculpting the compound to match the original factory contours. Using a dual-action orbital sander, I smooth the hardened filler until a transition between the steel and the patch is completely invisible to the touch. Next, I need to repair a snap bracket on the front suspension forks. I grind the broken edge clean, clamp a new piece of thick steel into place, and weld it solidly to the fork tube. I grind the fresh weld smooth, ensuring the bracket is incredibly strong. Meanwhile, I take the filthy exhaust baffle and submerge it in a deep bath of chemical rust remover, preparing it for a final mirror-like polishing session. Now we address the ruined motorcycle seat. I use pliers to pry open the rusted metal retaining tabs and strip away the torn, hardened vinyl cover. Underneath, the original foam is dirty but remarkably intact. I separate the foam pad from the severely rusted metal seat pan. Unrolling a brand new sheet of premium gray and black marine grade vinyl, I trace the exact dimensions of the old cover. I carefully cut out the new pattern, making sure to leave enough material for seams. Moving over to the vintage sewing machine, I meticulously stitched the vinyl panels together, following the classic two-tone design. Sewing thick motorcycle upholstery requires a lot of patience and precision to ensure the final cover is completely watertight and perfectly tailored to the foam. While the new vinyl cover is finished, the original foam pad smells terrible. I submerge the thick sponge into a bathtub filled with hot, soapy water, squeezing out decades of embedded dirt and brown sludge until it runs completely clear. Back in the workshop, I take an angle grinder to the heavily rusted metal seat pan, stripping it down to bare steel. I apply a thin layer of body filler to smooth out the severe pitting caused by the rust, sanding it perfectly flat. Now the incredibly satisfying painting phase begins. I hang the sanded frame, the repair body panels, and the smooth fenders in the paint booth. Using a professional spray gun, I apply several thick, even coats of high-quality gray epoxy primer to seal the metal. The primer has cured perfectly, and it is finally time for color. I mix up a brilliant factory-correct sky blue paint and load it into the spray gun. Watching the dull gray primer transform as the glossy, vibrant blue covers the main frame, the front forks, and the smooth body fairing is absolutely mesmerizing. The paint lays down flawlessly, giving the vintage moped an incredibly fresh, showroom quality shine. While the blue paint cures, I turn my attention to the smaller, heavily oxidized brackets and levers. I scrub the kickstart shaft in a solvent bath and take the rusty metal linkages over to the bench grinder. Using a spinning wire wheel, I polish the small steel components until they gleam, prepping them perfectly for the upcoming mechanical reassembly. frame painted. It is time to tackle the mechanical heart of this Jawa Moped. The engine block is completely covered in decades of oil, dirt, and grime. I place it on a washing grate and use a stiff brush with a heavy-duty degreaser to thoroughly scrub the exterior fins and casings. After a good rinse, I pull out the vintage service manual to reference the exact factory specifications. The first component to come off is the carburetor. I carefully unscrew the casing and dismantle the entire fuel delivery system. I remove the float bowl, extract the delicate brass jets, and take out the throttle slide. Every single microscopic port inside this carburetor will need to be meticulously cleaned to ensure the engine runs flawlessly. Now we dive into the engine block. I start by removing the side cover screws. To ensure I don't mix them up, I punch them into a simple cardboard template, a classic mechanic's trick. Pulling the cover off reveals the primary drive chain and the clutch assembly. I carefully remove the pressure plate and extract the heavy clutch springs, followed by the worn-out friction plates and the primary chain. Next, I move over to the electrical side of the engine. I use a specialized puller tool to safely detach the magneto rotor from the crankshaft. Once the rotor is off, I unscrew the vintage ignition stator plate and carefully pull the wiring harness through the casing. Finally, I remove the front drive sprocket, stripping the engine bare. It is time to split the crankcase halves. I bolt a custom metal puller plate to the engine block and slowly tighten the center bolt, safely separating the tight aluminum casings without causing any damage. Once open, the complex transmission gear clusters are exposed. Upon close inspection, I discover exactly why this bike was abandoned. One of the main transmission gears has a completely shattered tooth. I carefully extract the broken gear cluster and the shift mechanism. Next, I remove the kickstart shaft and pull the main crankshaft out of its bearings. Finally, I tilt the casing over a plastic bowl to drain out a massive pool of thick, incredibly black, sludgy oil that has been trapped inside this engine for decades. It is an absolute mess. With the crankcase completely empty, I spray the aluminum halves with a powerful foaming engine cleaner and aggressively scrub away the internal sludge. Next, we inspect the original piston. It is in terrible condition, covered in deep scratches and impact dents. I gather all the salvageable transmission gears and soak them in a chemical solvent bath to dissolve the baked-on carbon. Because the original piston was destroyed, the cylinder walls are heavily scored. I mount the cast iron cylinder block onto a massive industrial metal lathe and begin the first reburring process. Using precision cutting tools and a micrometer, I carefully machine the inner cylinder wall to perfectly fit a brand new, oversized piston. Meanwhile, I start wet sanding the outer engine covers to prepare them for polishing. It is time for the most visually satisfying part of the engine restoration. The aluminum side covers are currently dull, scratched, and oxidized. I clean up the smaller brake levers using a wire brush attachment and then unbox a brand new set of heavy-duty cotton buffing wheels and professional-grade polishing compound. I mount the buffing wheel to my bench grinder and get to work on the engine casings. By applying firm pressure and letting the heavy-cut compound do its magic, the dull gray aluminum slowly transforms. The heavy oxidation melts away, revealing an absolutely flawless mirror-like chrome finish. Holding the polished cover next to an untouched piece highlights an incredible night and day difference. This extreme level of detail is what makes a vintage restoration truly stand out. I continue the intensive polishing process, buffing the cylinder head fins and the aluminum kickstart lever until they shine like liquid metal. Now, we need to address the heavily rusted rear wheel sprocket. I submerge it in a deep bath of red chemical rust remover for a full 72 hours. The intense oxidation has completely turned into a thick, dark sludge. I scrub it down and take it to the workbench, using an angle grinder with a wire wheel to strip the steel completely bare. The transformation is amazing. I press a brand new sealed bearing into the center hub and apply a clear protective coat to prevent future rust. Finally, I wash the freshly polished engine covers one last time to remove any leftover buffing compound. The highly anticipated engine reassembly finally begins. I take the immaculately clean crankcase and carefully install the replacement transmission gears and the intricate gear selector mechanism to ensure the new main bearings and crankshaft slide in perfectly without any forceful hammering. I use a heat gun to expand the aluminum casing. The cold steel bearings drop right into their seats effortlessly. With the crankshaft in place, it is time to seal the engine. I apply a continuous bead of high-temperature red silicone sealant around the mating edge, carefully lay down a brand new paper gasket, and press the top crankcase half into position. I insert all the retaining screws and tighten them down evenly in a star pattern. The mechanical core is now perfectly sealed and secure. Moving forward, I gently tap brand new rubber oil seals into the crankcase to prevent leaks. Next, I unbox a fresh primer drive chain and new clutch friction plates. I slide the clutch basket onto the shaft, layer the plates, and lock down the heavy-duty springs. After applying red silicone sealant, I bolt the mirror-polished side cover onto the block. Now for the top end, I use a wire brush to clean the cylinder head's combustion chamber. I install the brand new piston onto the connecting rod, compress the piston rings, and carefully slide the freshly machined cylinder block over it. Finally, I bolt on the restored ignition stator plate and the front drive sprocket. The completely rebuilt engine block is coming together perfectly and looks absolutely gorgeous on the workbench. We are in the final stages of the engine build. I reassemble the carburetor using brand new brass jets and a fresh float, then bolt it securely to the intake manifold. I attach the kickstart lever and the gear shifter, and there it is, the fully rebuilt mirror-polished Jawa engine block. It is an absolute masterpiece compared to the mud-caked wreck we started with. Setting the engine aside, I focus on the smaller details. I take the speedometer drive gear, polish the outer housing, pack the inside with fresh grease, and reassemble the delicate internal cables. Then, I take the vintage metal horn grill and several rusted mounting nuts over to the buffing wheel, polishing them until they shine like chrome. Every single small detail truly matters. The restoration requires some custom fabrication. Following a hand-drawn blueprint on a sticky note, I machine a perfect stainless steel mounting knob on the lathe. Next, we tackle the motorcycle seat, which was completely torn and rotten. I take the original metal seat pan and a preserved foam pad and begin stretching a brand new two-tone black engraved vinyl cover over the top. I pull the material incredibly tight to remove any wrinkles, folding the edges under the pan and securing them by hammering down the integrated metal retaining clips. To finish the seat, I use a drill to create mounting holes and screw the decorative aluminum trim pieces around the lower edge. The fresh upholstery now looks absolutely incredible and is ready for the frame. Let's get the front end looking like a motorcycle again. I take the freshly painted white headlight nacelle and screw in the brilliantly polished metal horn grille. I carefully slide the entire housing over the blue front forks, bolting it securely into place. After quickly buffing a rusty bracket on the bench grinder, I insert the polished chrome handlebars. Moving to the drivetrain, I loop the new heavy-duty drive chain over the sprockets and lock it together using a master link. I drill a few mounting holes in the frame, insert protective rubber grommets, and begin routing the completely rebuilt electrical wiring harness. Finally, I slide the new bulb into the headlight reflector, connect the wires, and mount the glass lens securely into the front housing. With the electrical system successfully routed, I focus on the critical engine controls. I unbox the final brass carburetor components and begin assembling the throttle linkage. I thread the new throttle cable through the top cap, attach the internal spring, and carefully slide the delicate slide valve into the carburetor body. The fully assembled carb is then bolted tightly onto the engine's intake manifold. Moving up to the handlebars, I slide on the brand new textured rubber grips, using a rubber mallet to tap them perfectly into position. Next, I install the freshly painted white footboards, securing the rubber step pads with polished screws. To finish this segment, I route the rear brake cable along the swing arm and connect it to the tensioner on the rear hub. After fine-tuning the rear brake tension, I drop the restored vintage speedometer into the headlight housing. The dial reads exactly at 07708 kilometers. Now, we install the signature bodywork. I take the large, sky blue side covers and carefully wrap them around the frame, making sure they align seamlessly with the engine block. I secure the panels using the custom stainless steel mounting knobs I machined earlier on the lathe. Once the covers are locked down, I move to the rear fender and begin wiring the taillight assembly. I strip the wires, solder the connections to the bulb housing, and screw on the ruby red plastic lens. Finally, I mount the gorgeous mirror-polished chrome exhaust pipe, bolting it securely to the engine cylinder and onto the lower frame bracket. We have finally reached the ultimate finish line. I place a funnel into the engine case and pour an exact required amount of fresh gear oil. Next, I snap the newly upholstered seat onto its hinges, lock it down, and attach the chrome rear view mirror. The absolute final touch is applying the crisp white Jawa decals perfectly straight onto the blue side covers. I push the completed motorcycle out of the garage and out into bright sunlight. With a single kick, the rebuilt two-stroke engine fires up instantly, blowing that classic blue smoke. Taking it for a test ride down the street, the bike performs absolutely flawlessly, from a rusty mud-caked road to a beautiful showroom vintage masterpiece. Its extreme restoration is a total triumph.